Hello guys, and welcome back to the Pulse Social Sports podcast, where this week we're speaking to Noel Thatcher, a six-time Paralympian competitor with 5 gold medals who also works as a physiotherapist.
So we'll just open things out and just say again, thanks for taking the time and coming to talk to us. It means a lot to have you here.
It's an absolute pleasure, and thank you very much for asking me to come on the podcast.
No, absolutely. So we'll just open out a little bit with just who are you, where are you from, and just a bit about yourself, really.
Okay, so my name's Noel Thatcher. I suppose I'm best known as a 6-time visually impaired Paralympian. So I'm from, I live in Essex at the moment. I was born in South London, raised all over the place, but I'm currently residing in sunny Essex. By day, I'm a physiotherapist, specialising in the management of running-related injuries, and I also have lots of Japanese connections. So my wife's Japanese, and I've done a lot of work with various Japanese sports and cultural organisations around upcoming Paralympics.
No, very good. And so obviously you mentioned that you're a Paralympic runner. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah. So I'm visually impaired.
So how did you first kind of get involved with running? How did you decide that was the thing for you?
Okay, so it's an interesting story, one I've told quite a lot. But I went to a boarding school for the blind and visually impaired in Coventry when I was 10 years old. My parents sent me there because they thought I'd have better academic opportunities, and the kind of character building activity or ethos of the school, we used to be sent out to do like house runs. So boys lived in one house, yeah, and we'd be sent out to do these runs. It's usually a couple of miles around the school grounds and the local lanes, and I absolutely hated it. And to cut a very long story short, I'd do everything to get out of it. But when I was 12 and 13, one of my mates suggested we go off and have a sly fag, and it was my one and only cigarette. And in about an hour and a half after we were due to return to the school, we finally sort of crept back in, and teacher smelt our breath. The game was up effectively, and the punishment for this was to be sent out every night for a month to run 5 miles around the local lanes. And this is pre-Childline, and the teacher would follow us in his car and jump out from behind hedges and shout at us and force us to keep going. And at the end of this kind of Kenyan-esque training camp, I took part in the school cross-country championships, and up to that point, I would have been last or second to last consistently, mainly through lack of interest and effort. But after this training block, I came third and got a bit of notice from the teachers, got some positive praise. This running, I like the film, I like the fact that master of your own destiny. And lucky when I was 16, I won my first national schools title over 400 meters. And at that meeting in London was spotted by a gentleman called John Anderson, who was coach to Dave Morcroft, who at that time was the world 5,000 meter record holder. So I went from running around our school field to training with the best 5,000 meter runner in the world in the piece of about 6 weeks. So it was quite a sharp learning curve, but yeah, that's the rest, as they say, is history.
That is just a vast contrast to what you'd get in today's education. I like that quite a bit, actually. That's amazing.
We were really lucky, it's a school for the visually impaired, and we had incredible opportunities. So we were always doing something after school. So in the summer, there'd be an athletics event going on our school field every single evening, and we were swimming and we were cycling and going on walking holidays. So we were really active. We were always outside. We were never discouraged from taking part in sport solely on the basis of being visually impaired or blind. So that's a model of education for which the headmaster duly got an OBE, and rightly so. And I think when I went to my first Paralympics in '84, half the swimmers and half the athletes came from our school. So it's an amazing breeding ground for for sort of developing sporting potential, as it were. But we were having a lot of fun as well, and we'd challenge each other to sort of crazy press-up competitions or runs. And at one point, and this is one of the highlights of my athletics career, 4 of us won the local schools cross-country championships. And at that time, we'd get a lot of flack for being visually impaired. And it was absolutely amazing, to defeat all the local school kids who would, on a Saturday afternoon, take a great deal of pleasure in sort of bullying us and teasing us. So, that victory was very sweet.
That's absolutely amazing. That's really, really good to hear, that how you just kind of went to these other schools and just swept the floor with them. That's amazing.
And bossed them in big style, yeah. And 3 of us wearing football boots, as I remember rightly. But I think there's always that sense, if you've got a visual impairment or any other kind of impairment or a disability, that to prove yourself, and maybe you don't have to prove yourself to anybody but other than yourself. But there was certainly was a big sense of that. But we used to take a lot of pride in winning or just pushing ourselves physically. There was just pure joy of running. Or, as I said, I can remember one of my mates or 2 of my mates rather, having a press-up competition during the school day to see who could do the most press-ups. And I think one of them got to about 5,000. It was that kind of place where, we were always pushing the boundaries, sometimes in areas where we probably shouldn't have, to be fair.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. So obviously you mentioned that you went to the national schools. Was that your first major competition?
Yeah, it's my first national title. So I would have been, I am guessing, 17. Up to that point, I'd done a couple of junior competitions and, mainly for fun, but that was on a different level. And it was on the basis of that competition that I got selected to become part of the national squad. And I think that would have been in sort of June, July. And it was that September that I made my international debut at European Championships in Varna in Bulgaria, where I won a bitter silver medal in the 400 meters. So it was quite a rapid rise. And as soon as I got training with Dave Moorcross group, and an amazing group of athletes, I think 5 guys in that group had run under 4 minutes for a mile. We had a host of Commonwealth medalists, and I really just fell in love with the sport of track and field. The people, the training, the environment, so welcoming for us as visually impaired kids. No one ever mentioned disability. We were there to train hard and have some fun. Just an incredible model for sport.
No, definitely. So from my notes that I have here, you have competed in every game from 84 to 2004. Is that correct?
Was really fortunate to escape in 84 and finishing up in Athens.
Would you say that throughout your time of racing, during those 20 years, what were your most memorable experiences, if you could narrow it down?
I think the 2 that stand out were the 5,000, 10,000 meter double in Atlanta in 1996, because the context around that was that a month or so before the games, I was training in Japan and I was running a 50-kilometer long run. And cut a long story short, felt a sharp pain in my left shin, and to cut a long story short, that turned out to be a tibial stress fracture. And so it was touch and go on the start line for the 10K. And that's a testament to an incredible team of people, both in Japan and the GP team. And winning, the 10K, carrying a stress fracture in a world record. I think the psychological sort of context of that, I was in a deep, dark place going into that race. And really, I think, were it not for my teammates and the support of both British and Japanese, athletes and supporters, there's no way I could have been able to produce a performance like that. So that's one. And then I think the other one would be the 5,000 meters gold medal in Sydney, where 3 days before I'd run the 10K and completely blown it. My mind wasn't in a good place at all. I got a real rollicking from my wife following the 10K. And she effectively said to me, that's not you running. That, you need to get your act together and run like a champion. And I subsequently stood on the start line in Sydney with a face like I just described it on another podcast, like I looked like a serial killer in the pictures, because I was so intense and so focused. And I went to the front after 80 meters, ran the rest of the race in the lead, and set a personal best, broke a world record, and won a gold medal in the process. So it's kind of interesting that it takes a little bit to bring these performances out of me. And other games as well. In Barcelona, I developed facial paralysis just through, well, the doctor thought it was through this sheer stress that I put on myself. And that was, before I won the 1500 meters there. So these performances, when you look at them, they really don't tell the story behind it. And there are a lot of people who I'm incredibly thankful for actually making sure that I was in the position to do what I was able to do.
No, definitely. That sounds absolutely phenomenal. So obviously you mentioned now that you were a physiotherapist. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I work in an independent hospital, currently supporting the NHS, and been there for 15 years, and I love it.
Oh, amazing. So what type of things do you do as a physiotherapist?
So although I mentioned that I specialise, or have a special interest, I should say, in the management of running related injuries, I'm actually one of those guys. If I actually just had to treat runners, I'd probably get very stale very quickly. So I really just enjoy it's a privilege really to be involved in helping someone get from a position of pain or injury or disability back to doing what they want to do. So that being part of that journey, it's a little bit like being a coach, isn't it? Helping someone achieve something, that's incredibly rewarding. It's also a nice intellectual challenge, the research constantly changing, and I like trying to stay on top of that. I'm really lucky to work with an incredible team of physios, consultants, nurses. At the minute, it's about trying to help other people get through this whole process, that we've all been struggling with the pandemic. And I'm really lucky that sport has given me some resilience, and it's given me some tools and some positivity, because training for a Paralympics, or I'm not going to equate it to trying to manage some of the challenges of the pandemic, because there are people who've experienced things that I hope I'd never have to experience in my life. Horrendous impact this has had on everybody, but it has enabled the experience as a Paralympian has enabled me to develop that belief that things will get better and we can pull together. And it's taught me the importance of teamwork, and as I said, it's taught me the importance of resilience. So from that point of view, that's probably what I'm enjoying most, is that ability to give some of that positivity to other people to help them get through it.
No, definitely. That's really great to hear. And if you don't mind me rounding things off with one final question, would you say that disability sports are on the rise from the grassroots levels right up to the professional element?
Yeah, I'm going to have to say yes. I mean, things are entirely different to when I started my career. There are so many more opportunities. The Paralympics was born in Stoke Mandeville in 1948. So in the UK, sometimes it's easy to forget how lucky we are. We've got athletes on lottery funding who have access to the same training facilities as their non-disabled peer groups. They're recognised largely to the same extent, although I'm sure there are some athletes who would argue that isn't always the case. But we've also, we've got a culture of positive attitudes toward disability. That means that if someone's son or daughter does have cerebral palsy, or is in a wheelchair, or is blind, that there are pathways for them to develop their full potential. And then on the international stage, we're so lucky to have the International Paralympic Committee headed up by Andrew Parsons, who they're just fantastic advocates for human potential. We've got great, role models, international Paralympians who I think, we can all learn from them, particularly, during the pandemic, we all face challenges, some greater than others. None of us are perfectly able to deal with them. Sometimes we need some help, but I think from that point of view, I think the Paralympics is hugely important for us as individuals, us as a society, and as a global community.
No, definitely. That's absolutely perfect. I just wanted to say a massive thanks again for coming out. It was a really good interview. Thanks so much.
Paddy, you caught me on a good evening, mate. What can I say? I'm not always as hopefully that I think we got quite a lot of good stuff there. So they're good questions, Paddy. So that you can't have a good answer without a good question. So thanks for putting that all together for me.
No, thanks so much. It's just been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Likewise, mate. Listen, enjoy the rest of your evening.
A massive thank you to Noel for coming on the show, and a massive thank you to our listeners at home as well. If you'd like more content like this, please like and subscribe to our Facebook, our Twitter, our LinkedIn, or our YouTube at Social CIC. That's all we've got time for. See you next week.